listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Cullington, and joining me once again, it's Mr. Kevin Dursow. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's been a long couple of weeks. We're kind of in the heat of the summer here. Barbenheimer has swept the nation. And here we are back with you again to talk about some Flyers, talk about some news around the NHL. Before we dive into today's show, follow us on the social media, wherever that is, the platform formerly known as Twitter, whatever you want to call it. At YWT Podcast, pretty much everywhere. Kevin's at Kevin_Durso, pretty much everywhere. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the like button over there. Okay.
And on all of your favorite platforms otherwise for listening, for podcast listening anyway. So
Yes.
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all, you name it.
Yeah.
They're all scrolling across the bottom. Have fun reading that.
You know where to find your podcast by now.
Yes, you do.
All right. We don't have a whole lot of Flyers news to get into. We are kind of in the depths of the summer here. We're definitely... we're light
as if the mention of Barbenheimer at the start of this thing wasn't a hint to where we are.
That's what I'm saying.
That more people can be talking about that than the amount of news that's out on the Flyers right now.
We're in full-blown summer show territory for sure. So,
oh yeah.
That being said, our first topic, Morgan Frost.
Mm-hmm.
When we last spoke 2 weeks ago, he had not signed his contract. Danny Briere had essentially finished all his other business for the summer. Everyone got re-signed. We got everybody taken care of. We knew what was going on. The roster's looking pretty set. As we sit here 2 weeks later, Morgan Frost. Kevin, what's the update?
There's not much, to be honest. I mean, he has no contract yet. So That's the first part of this. I think for a lot of people that there's kind of an antsy quality to this because everything else is done, especially when they went on a run of, because our last show was kind of heavily dominated with the bridge deal. We talked about bridge deals a lot, right? And we talked about Noah Cates and Cam York, and it was like, okay, cross those two off. And in due time, so too came, Ronnie Adder had already signed earlier in the offseason. Ola Lixel had his contract. And you're sitting here now going, okay, Frost is the only one left. And really the last order of business from an entire contractual standpoint. I mean, they really don't have to do a thing after Morgan Frost if you really think about it. Right. And there's just it now. And of course, like the other thing about it is I think there's a lot of stuff going on around the league, maybe not in terms of tons of signings or things like that, but arbitration's heating up like at this point. Now you're starting to see on occasion, oh, here's where the team is and here's where the player's at, and we're going to get the arbitration hearing coming soon. And Noah Cates was the only Flyer who had even elected for it as arbitration eligible, and obviously they settled that way before we would have gotten to hearing dates, so that was taken care of. So I think that there's just an anticipation of kind of being done with everything. Let's just move on from all of this, and then you're basically awaiting the training camp portion of next season. You're kind of already, like, at that point you turn the page on the offseason and you start to look ahead to next seain with maybe a few tiny little things here and there like scattered in. But
time to start getting back in shape.
Well, and for the most part everybody is like the Flyers just had like their whole community fan fest kind of thing going on. They do over the summer. It was a community caravan, I think is what it's called. And they did one of the dates is just held at the training center in Voorhees. And among like Tyson Forster's been making appearances. Cam York is making appearances. There's one more Joel Farabee's been making appearances. That tells you they're already here. They're in town. They're working out. And I'm sure they're not alone.
And all those are guys who are kind of at the point where they should be. These aren't guys who, for the most part, need to be recuperating and recovering from various surgeries over the summer. These are young players who are developing and working on skills and improving their game, and this is what we like to see out of them. Mm-hmm.
So I don't think, there's not much of an update on Morgan Frost in terms of where everything is at. There's kind of rumblings out there that there's kind of at a standstill, that there's not really much progress being made between the two sides. Look, it's going to happen at some point. He's a restricted free agent. I don't think that you're going to run into any serious problems here.
I don't think anybody's going to offer sheet Morgan Frost, for example.
I think you're already out of that period anyway, because I think you would have pushed on that even earlier if that was the case. But No, because what I think the other thing about this is what it has prompted is a lot of discussion about what the contract should be. And I think that, look, I think there's a really easy answer because you've already Danny Briere has been nothing if not consistent with his contracts all offseason. And what do I mean by that? Nothing but 1 and 2 year deals.
Yep.
And I don't think Morgan Frost is necessarily a 1 year deal kind of guy to just bridge him to something like immediately, not to next offseason and we're going to do this all over again. I don't think it's that. I definitely don't think he's in the long-term window because what does he have other than a really, really solid second half when some of the pressure was off? Like, he got more playing time. He took advantage of it. He had some really solid numbers by the end of the year. He was actually, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly here, based on everything I've seen, he was actually the team's highest scorer point-wise in the last 35-ish games or so.
When Kevin Hayes stopped showing up.
Well, yes, and without Travis Konechny out there every night because Konechny missed some time in there and things like that. And that's beside the point, to be honest. Like, it's not about that. Like,
but
it's actually kind of the one part that is impressive with him in that spot is he was actually producing more points in the same amount of games than Owen Tippett was, and Owen Tippett got a ton of attention for it.
Oh, way more attention. But
now, I can tell you the reason. The reason is because it was way more goals for Owen Tippett than it was for Morgan Frost. But Frost had like his moments. Like I don't know. One of the clips I've seen going around a lot on socials is he scored a game winner against Montreal. I think it was in might have been February or March-ish. It was somewhere around like the post deadline. Roughly, it was around the deadline, close to, and that was kind of, that's kind of that territory where you're like, okay, that was when he started having, because remember all of his points in the beginning of the year, like he had a bunch of, like he had a really great debut, like the season opener, he had 2 goals, or did he get 2 goals in that game? I think he did, because I think he had an empty netter that people weren't sure if it was Lazinski's or his, and I think it went to him. Right. So he had 2 goals in the opener, and then kind of like went back to the usual, here's a point here and there kind of thing. And then when he was playing the Arizona Coyotes, just went off for 4 points per game.
It turns out they're a high school team.
Well, I mean, when you play in the college arena that seats 5,000, but either way. But that was the range of his production in the first half. Then the second half, you finally got some consistency, but it was way after the main point,
Yeah, and if the Morgan Frost that shows up for the last 30 games of the season shows up for this current upcoming season, I think we have a really solid little, 65, 70 point player, really the type of player, okay. Morgan Frost is in an interesting position. I think his next deal will probably be a 2-year bridge. That's what we've seen out of all the other RFAs this offseason. If he continues where he's going, right? Last season, I just had this up. Last season, 46 points total over the 81 games he played. If he gets that number up to 60, 65, somewhere in that neighborhood, and he does that over the next 2 seasons, how much you getting paid on the back end of that when it's time to sign the big boy contract? You're talking 6, 7, 8 million, especially with the salary cap going where it's going.
Right. And I know that he's an interesting topic, Morgan Frost is, because what everybody remembers is it's not even about the first round pick status, because he's a late first rounder. Sometimes a late first rounder is a fourth liner. I don't think enough people realize that it just happens. Well, I'm sorry, you know what? People are infatuated, and I'm not taking anything away from him as what he brings to a team in a locker room, but people get infatuated with Scott Laughton, and Scott Laughton was taken higher than Morgan Frost was. Yep. It doesn't always equate to you're just top points, top line production because you went in the first round, unless, maybe if you were in this draft, and you're being picked 25th means you were really near a top 10 quality player
in most
in every other draft. Well, okay, that makes some sense, but
and Morgan Frost to me is kind of the guy that summarizes really. I'm trying to say this carefully because I don't want to knock Morgan Frost. I do think he's a good player. I think he summarizes everything that's wrong with what's happened over the last decade with this team. We have a guy who we picked late in the first round because we couldn't properly, get into a top 10 draft position for a decade.
Well, not quite. because that was the Nolan Patrick year. So they had elevated themselves into the top 2, and then they didn't have another pick there. So they actually traded in.
Right. But
him.
It feels like you're taking a stab in the mid to late first round, which the lineup has. It feels like the lineup has a dozen of those guys. And
well, it does. That part's true.
Right. And so then we move on, and he's, dealt with some injury, which is something that we've seen before. And
infamously the 21 shortened season where he was supposed to basically be able to play the whole year, and he got hurt, and he didn't play the first 2 games. And he didn't play the first 2 games, then played the next 2, and it was literally game 2 he got hurt, and it was over.
And so we talk about drafting late in the first round. I know this wasn't a specific example of it because they traded in, but you're talking about the quality of player that we've ended up with several times over the years. Then he comes in.
You said it right off. Yeah, you said it right off.
Then he comes in and has some injury problems. Mm-hmm. Then his development suffers because he has some injury problems. Then we hear about him not being in the right role because he's playing in the bottom 6 and blah 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 blah. Hopefully, as this franchise starts to kind of steer in the correct direction, Morgan Frost can be a guy who turns that corner. And I know he started turning it kind of towards the back half of the season like we've been talking about. But if he continues to turn that corner and he's still young enough that an improvement to your development process can save him.
Right.
He's also old enough that has to happen soon.
Correct. Absolutely.
That being said, I think his ceiling has been lowered a little bit just with how the Flyers have treated him, because I do remember he had a lot of skill coming out of the draft. Mm-hmm. His ceiling has probably been lowered a little bit, but I think if he settles in as a nice little middle 6 player, he can be a very successful NHL talent.
Well, one of the things that you want to consider, especially right now in the here and now, is if a player today can play in your top 6 today, because your team's not loaded with depth right now.
Yes.
We know this. So if a player can play in your top 6 today and reach a certain level of production that, like Owen Tippett did. Like Owen Tippett playing in your top 6 and getting to 25 goals now has you thinking, is there more? Because he's young enough for there to be a more,
Yes.
And then if that happens over the next 2 years while you're waiting for Cutter Gauthier and Matvei Mishkov and all of these guys that you're now starting to build a future for, and that are supposedly going to just slide right into your top 6 and start clearing guys out. Well, all of a sudden, isn't it better to sit there and say, Owen Tippett probably plays top line for the years that they're not here, and then when you move him, you go, a 25 to 30 goal scorer is now moving to your second line.
Yep.
Now you have more now you have more depth that has shown that they can do it.
Absolutely.
The thing with Frost is, and you hit it right off the top because you said it, your word was perfect for it. He's good.
Yeah.
He's been a good NHLer. He's not even close to great. He's certainly not he's not going to even probably reach elite status at any point. Like elite is
probably not.
I mean, let's this way. I think you're at the point where good, very good, great, outstanding, elite, maybe like there's multiple tiers we're going to go through to get from good to that crazy level.
And the crazy thing about hockey is that at 24 years old, if you're not already there, it's unlikely that you're going to get there.
It can be, absolutely.
Yeah, unless your name is Sean Couturier, like you probably are pretty.
And
close
you're a very big late bloomer, yeah.
Right.
I mean, but the thing with Frost is really this for me, because the year that he got drafted, I want to read you his numbers from juniors that year, and then probably what created this. Kind of
complex,
not complex, created this kind of far-fetched potential that he was going to be able to achieve at the NHL just because he was at this point, like after you get drafted, now you're kind of an overager in the, you're Canadian
expected to go
junior ranks.
Yeah.
Right. You're kind of expected to take a step. And then if you stay for any longer,
it starts to get a little embarrassing.
Right. Exactly. Or it can at least create that situation. So the year that he got drafted, he played 67 games for the Sioux Greyhounds in the OHL, scored 20 goals, had 62 points. Now that's nice, and that's probably first round worthy. I can understand that because
had 112 points.
No. This is the year before he got drafted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is leading. That's the 16-17 season. So when he gets drafted, the best he's done in juniors is 62 points in 67 games, which is still first round worthy.
Yeah.
You've gotten close to point per game. Like that's what makes people sit there and say late first round. I'll think about it because you're near point per game. As a 17-year-old than an 18-year-old. In fact, I think he was at that point. Then you go to the next year. Now it's draft plus one. And all of a sudden in draft plus one, as I'm sure some space cleared out and he became a number one guy with the Greyhounds.
Yep. The production stepped up.
He doubles his goal total to 42 points. And he nearly doubles his point total to 112.
Yeah.
In the same number of games, 67. And oh, by the way, while we're at it, because I'm sure that I have to check. I'm not sure why it won't scroll over to show me the playoffs, but I'm pretty sure that he, in the playoffs that year,
he had 29 points in 24 games.
There you go.
So also, plus minus is a stat that isn't super important, generally speaking. But that year, by the way, he was plus 70. Plus 70 with the Greyhounds.
That's insane.
Hello?
Yep.
Also, good for Morgan. 56 PIMs.
I hear you. And then he goes, and this is the thing.
Bullying those 15-year-olds.
Now, but this is the thing, because by this point, what's the hold up here? You know what I mean? Like, the guy just put up 112 points.
He just went back and dominated. Right.
Okay. No, and you understand why he goes back for that year because he's coming off of 62 and 67. You understand why he's got to go back to juniors for the following year after his draft. But now you're sitting here going, boy, 112 points and 42 goals in 67 games. Now it feels like you're taking a step, like you're ready for something. And he goes back again for another year. And he plays 58 games, 37 goals. So 9 fewer games. So all right, 5 fewer goals in 9 fewer games. That's not outrageous. He probably if he plays in 9 games, he probably matches or passes it.
Oh, easily.
I can see that. And the point total is even better because in 9 fewer games, he's only 3 short of what he had.
Yep.
So he's going to pass that if he plays the 9 games easily. He's going to probably get to close to 120.
Absolutely.
At that point.
Maybe even 130 with the numbers.
I mean,
putting up. 125. Yeah.
And this also, by the way, includes going to World Juniors, 5 games, 8 points, 4 goals. Like, it's not like you just showed up and were participating. You were a key player in that.
He was a big
team.
player on that Canada team. Yeah.
So there you go. And that's when it kind of all starts to shift. And that's when he gets, that's when he signs and he comes over. Well, he didn't have to sign to go back to juniors. You get the point, though.
Right.
That's when he finally makes the jump to pro after that. Because now he's out age. He basically played to the age limit.
Technically, he did sign his contract that first year. It just happened to entry-level slide. But
well, of course. That's the beauty of Canadian junior prospects.
It's wild how that whole thing works. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, as compared to it's the argument, right? Like, this is the argument you have between these guys and the college guys. Because as soon as you sign that with a college guy, you're burning the first year effective immediately.
Yep.
So, that's the difference. But
and then you take the risk drafting the college guy because he'd just walk on you.
That's true. And it's happened multiple times. So
Adam Fox.
Sure. And then the good news, like the thing with Frost when he finally got to the pro level is he seemed like he was more than ready for it because in the first few, once he got going at Lehigh Valley, 41 games, 13 goals, 29 points, you're like, okay, he's kind of starting to keep up with that pace again.
He's figuring it out as a pro.
He's figuring it out. Yep. Well, he's figuring it out enough to get some attention. And, the point production wasn't great at the NHL level, and he had plenty of games where he was kind of overmatched, and you could see it. But he still had 2 goals and 7 points in 20 games. I think he was kind of a bit of an instant success because he came in, he scored in his debut. Then he played that game in Carolina where I think he had 3 points. He had another goal. He had 2 assists, and it was
he picked up most of his points in his first 3 or 4 games.
Right, and had everything going, which is kind of it's not all that different from Tyson Forster, to be honest. This past year, Forster came in and had an even smaller sample size than this, and was picking up points in a good pace. And then you're right. Once the 2 things that really did him in were collectively over 2 different seasons because he wasn't, he was playing with the Flyers, but they started to, he eventually went back to the Phantoms because they got healthier and they traded for players because at the deadline they were going to be buyers that year.
They were a decent team.
Right. And he goes back down and that was the end of that, Then COVID hits. That's the end of that. Now, the next year, he's prepping to be part of the team that
the NHL roster.
Not in the bubble, but yes, on the roster, it's going to play the 7 same teams over and over again for 56
games. Oh,
and he gets only 2, and and there's not much of a minor league season, and you know what I mean.
That was when he got hurt, right?
Yes, but that's what I'm saying. Like, even if he was preparing to come back, there's not much of a minor league season. So now you don't even have a place that you can try to say, well, once you're closer, we'll rehab you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it was just a complete lost year. And
everything was funky that year.
And then the year after, because now you're starting to hit that point where, again, the amount of injuries that the team had over 21-22, he was going to get playing time because he was kind of too good. Like, then he was showing he's too good to play in the minors. He's got 6 goals, 19 points in 24 games. So he was too good to play in the minors. But he obviously couldn't find consistency in points production at the NHL level. You play 55 games, you score 5 goals and 16 points. You're looking more like the guy who, after those first handful of games at the NHL level the 2 years before, that can't find it,
Yep.
And that's why, like, the contract is such an interesting discussion, because the numbers this year, really, it's an astronomical jump when you think about it, because you went from the best year you had was 55 games, 5 goals, 16 points, and now you played a full 81, like 81 out of 82, and you went from 5 to 19 and from 16 to 46. Like, it's not like you made some increase and had 30 extra games and we're sitting there going, whatever. No, you actually basically, based on that, you had a point per the game. You didn't, point per game for the amount of games that you made up by playing near a full season.
So if this contract is 2 years at 3 or 3.5, is anybody upset about that?
Well, I think that money range is exactly what you're looking for. I think 3 is realistically probably right on the money, because it's just, I can understand how, for his professional experience, let's call it, compared to Noah Cates, let's say, I can understand how Frost feels like he could earn more money, because from a games played standpoint, he's got way more games played than Noah Cates does.
Right. Absolutely.
Way more. And yes, the key difference between Frost and Cates also is, now Cates had one rookie year and seemed like he found something. Like we talked about his point totals and where it could go in the next handful of years also.
Yeah.
But he, like, for what Frost was able to produce, you're sitting there saying, it kind of, like, you got to remember something. They signed, because everybody was sitting there going, how is Tippett making $1.5 million? Tippett didn't have that kind of season before signing the contract.
Right.
If you know when you're signing the contract, I just scored 25 in the NHL, then you're changing your mind about $1.5 million.
Absolutely.
They didn't know enough. He barely had enough games played. So I understand how, for a games played standpoint, you have to give him a little bit more of a benefit of the doubt. And to an extent, Frost is going to come into this thinking at least, and I hope he thinks this way, to be honest, because we're going to sit here and analyzing it the way that we know to analyze it is, well, a lot of this came later in the year. The pressure's off. The games didn't matter as much.
But he should be looking at that going, his agent should come in going, here's what we did over the last 30 games. What have you done for me lately? That's $3.5 million.
Well, and this is where I'm going with what Frost's attitude should be. So Frost's mindset should be, I can do this again, and I can be better than that even. Like,
fair.
Like, I can, you see how close, like, I'm right there to being 20-goal scorer, 50-point guy. Pay me like it, and I'll give it to you. And I'll try to do even more than that. And that way, like, that's how the next contract would get bigger. So I don't think you're off base with thinking about 60 points in 2 seasons, like getting from 46 to 60 in 2 seasons. If he's going to continue to grow, like, if we're being honest, if he can't pull that off in the next 2 seasons, I don't know if he's got a future here.
Well, and I think that's why the bridge deal probably makes the most sense. If you're the player, you're betting on yourself, and in 2 years you can negotiate a longer contract where the team is buying UFA years.
Right.
B, you have a higher cap to deal with it. C, hopefully you have 2 years of growth or at least consistency where you now have a better comparable for yourself. And then on the team side of things, if it works, it's probably going to cost you a little bit more money in the long run. Because like I said, if he comes out and puts up 60, 65 points per year over the next 2, you're probably paying him $7 or $8 million at that point.
I mean, potentially
on a long-term deal.
Yeah, potentially. I understand that. And the thing is, I don't want to make that sound like such a final statement. Like,
no, of course
if he doesn't reach a certain point number, that he's not going to stay. Do you know what the thing is with that though? for the style of player that he is, he's either got to find another aspect of his game that stands out to the level like that point production right there. Scott Lawton just had a season like that too, right?
Yep.
And it's the first season he had like that, reaching 40 points. Now he's been around for what feels like forever at this point, going on over a decade, right?
Yep.
Why does he get to stick around though? Because he brings something else beyond the point production.
Absolutely.
It's the penalty killing. It's the checking. It's the ability to be
responsibility.
It's his defensive responsibilities. It's his locker room presence. Like we don't know anything. Like we don't. I'm not trying to say Frost couldn't be a locker room presence. He did wear an A in juniors, so I'm not saying it's not capable. It's just if you're not that in the room, and if you're not something, and that's why like right now, like they've tried to work him on the penalty kill, and they've tried like sure you're going to give him a shot to prove that it's not just. You got to be there on offense. I mean, if he can turn into even like a good power play specialist, like you're carving out another reason to keep you beyond just point totals. Like so many of his points came at even strength this past year. Yep. So good. Okay, great. You're a good 5-on-5 player. What else can you do? And that's what I think they want to see in the next handful of years. And that's why this contract is such a difficult talking point because I think Frost wants to believe he's got a long-term future here. And I think he's prepared to sign it right now.
Sure.
Like, I think he thinks that he can be here for the long haul with this. But we kind of know already just based on track record that Danny Briere's not doing this. He's not even, I think even 3 is a stretch at this point. Like
I agree. No,
3 years has been a stretch for Danny Briere this offseason. It's really been like keeping it tight to the 1-2 year window and let's just play it out and see who else stays and who else doesn't kind of.
I think Danny Briere is doing a great job of doing what he has to do while maintaining control over players he needs to maintain control of while retaining long-term cap flexibility. And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. And Danny's got a lot going on, and I think he's doing a better job than we realize. And I think this Morgan Frost deal will probably stick to that as well.
Right.
I see no reason to see otherwise.
It goes back to the last show we did where we were asking how do you judge Danny Briere, all things considered. And that's why we even said it's right now it's smack in the middle because the big plays are in the future. And you're also giving yourself time to see, like you're giving yourself time for everything. You're giving yourself this year to see what the free agents you picked up could potentially fetch in trades later on. You're giving yourself the 2-year window to see what happens with Noah Cates with Noah Cates, with Cam York, and presumably with Morgan Frost, assuming the deal is on the shorter term and another bridge deal like we've seen. You're giving yourself a chance to observe it all, see who sticks. You got rid of the one, let's be real. You got rid of everybody who you knew wasn't an immediate part of the plans. Now you're playing even longer term than that. You got to see, you're not giving up on a 24-year-old, 25-year-old, whatever, at this stage of the game. You got to let it play out. So, and I also don't this is the other thing about it. I don't think, again, it's not a big deal that the contract's not done, even though we're at the tail end of July here.
No, absolutely not. I don't think
I'm pretty sure that last year, if I'm not mistaken, there were stories that I can, that I think I was publishing about RFAs who didn't have arbitration eligible cases that we're finally signing in mid to late August.
Right before camp.
It just is what it is.
It's just part of the game.
I think it was the speed at which everybody else got done. That's what really sped this up. It was like, oh, look, York is done.
Danny Briere wanted to take the summer off.
Well, and you know what? You kind of still, in a way, can when you're working with one agent and one guy. You got one thing to talk about. You're going to keep crunching numbers and figuring it out, and it'll get done. So let's calm down on that front.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a couple things there. You mentioned players that the Flyers got rid of who don't fit the system. And you mentioned power play specialists. Kevin, are there any players in the league who you might think of that fit both of those categories?
Sure. There's a guy who we were talking about a lot on last show and who signed a contract in between the last 2 weeks.
This podcast's favorite player, Tony DeAngelo.
Your favorite, maybe.
Tony DeAngelo has brought his talents to Raleigh again. 1 year, a shade over $1.5 million. It's another rehab deal. Quite frankly, with Brett Burns on the team, it's a pretty depth kind of deal for them.
Yeah.
I don't even really think there's a whole lot to say. He's a guy who is probably going to run their PP2 at this point, and that's about it.
Which is fair. I mean, like, here's the thing with this one, and I want to bring this up because of the fact. Well, first of all, it's the least surprising thing that could have happened. I mean, it was pretty obvious Carolina was a fit. I mean, we only said stuff about that for 2-3 weeks on end, where it was there's a trade in place with Carolina. There's a trade in place with Carolina, and listen, by playing this the way that it came out,
Don Waddell said, "Wait, I can get him for free." LOL, never mind.
Well, and not only that, but I can get him without having the other team retains 2.5, and we just wipe that whole contract. Like, so he slow played it into not having to pay anything, like to pay less, I should say. Like, now you're paying him almost $1 million less than you were going to have to just by making the trade and giving up one of your mid to low prospects, at that lower tier prospects.
Right.
But that's beside the point. If nothing else, I think the big thing that kind of came out of this, and this is not really earth-shattering breaking news or anything like that, but when he had his media availability for going back to Carolina, he did bring up that it was like that basically didn't agree with the coach. That's probably the main reason why things happen.
Wow, crazy.
I know it's not earth. I mean, we talked about it last show. I don't need to go back into it. That's why I tried to say from the very, not the beginning, but it's like I even said, what more can you say when the guy's pretty much the biggest thing he said on exit day was it was ridiculous. I didn't play the last 5 games of the season, and he was a healthy scratch.
Yeah,
the writing was on the wall. Tortorella had his thoughts and his opinions and all of that, and listen, if the type look, you and I both could talk for days about what we think of Rod Brind'Amour as a coach.
Absolutely.
And if that's the type of coach that you resonate with as a player, then go play for that team.
Sure.
That's look, if it works then it works. But it is what it is.
I'll be honest with you, Kevin.
Yeah.
I don't really expect to mention this player anytime.
I don't expect to either. I mean,
he is now former Flyer, Flyers alum, whatever you want to call it. Bye.
Yeah.
Don't let the door hit you.
For what it's worth, by the way, he did say in that presser that Danny Briere has been obviously been a good person and good for the front office also, and he did not that he needs to mention anything about any other team in media availability other than the team that you're going to play for next year, but he did say he thinks Briere can get him turned around, which
interesting. And as a guy who admittedly grew up a Flyers fan,
sure, and
that's probably coming from a genuine place.
Well, it's also a guy who got drafted not 2 years after he was bought out of his contract. Briere was bought out. I mean, so you grew up watching
fresh off Danny B, right?
Right, you grew up with them, and now that is the tough part of the business. No matter what player you are, that there are times where somebody's going to sit there and tell you, think about anybody who's playing for Colorado who may have grown up watching Colorado and says, I get to the team is basically run by Joe Sakic.
Right.
And Joe Sakic may have to call you and tell you we're buying out your contract.
We're trading you.
We're trading you. This stuff happened.
That's pretty funny.
Who was the guy I just saw? There was a clip from another podcast that I saw. It was Tyler Toffoli who said that he got the phone call about getting traded from LA at a team dinner.
Yeah.
And he knew it was possible. Like somebody told him to go have a good time tonight and enjoy it and stuff. And then he said, I saw Rob Blake's name pop up on my phone. And I went, well, I'm out.
Dinner's over. See you, boys.
Yeah, I'm out. So,
yep. Listen, I'll be honest. I don't really have a fun transition here, but we have that Flyers odds and ends tab up.
There's a couple little pieces.
Okay, I was to say because I do want to talk about the other signing Carolina made this offseason, and it's technically a re-signing, but we'll get into that here. Yeah, we do have a couple Flyers odds and ends.
A couple little things. So because Alexei Gendron signed his entry level contract. Now I don't know if people know, listeners know who this is necessarily, because you don't tend to necessarily pay close attention to the 7th round picks that a team makes. But this is one that you might want to pay attention to, because when you go from being and this is again, one of these draft plus one stories a little bit. When you get drafted 7th round by a team, you're kind of almost an afterthought in the draft. Yep. And then you go out in your draft plus 1 year as an afterthought, and you score 55 goals and 81 points.
Is that
in
good?
your next season. Split between two teams, which believe me, makes a difference when you're playing in Canadian juniors.
Oh, yeah.
Because it means chances are you went from being the best player on a really bad team to having to try to figure it out on a really good team.
Yeah, but he scored 47 points in 34 games with Gatineau after he got traded.
That's
so
true.
He still produced. He scored 33 goals in 34 games for Gatineau.
Yep. And so just saying, keep an eye on this kid. Because, and I don't think it means anything immediately. Like, he's going to probably go back to juniors this year.
And like you said, it's draft plus
that'll be draft plus 2 for him.
Right. But I'm saying this past year where he scored 33 goals in 34 games for the Gatineau Olympiques after he got traded there.
Right.
Just draft plus 1. Like, it's not like this is a 21-year-old running around beating up 15-year-olds.
Oh, exactly. So, like, it
makes a difference.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And, he's the type of guy that kind of in the same vein as an Elliot Desnoyers or an Ola Lixel, who may make some noise right now, like at juniors, and then you're going to want to watch him in the minors. Like, this is going to be a guy who you're definitely going to slow play to get anywhere close to the NHL, but there's something.
But he's going to put butts in seats in the Phantoms for the Phantoms.
Well, you got something, and I think you need to have something. Like, you need for something. A lot of these prospects, you need to just have something that gets you. All right, I see something that I can work with.
Right. So we talk all the time about development and drafting and scouting and this, that, the other, and all that matters. Obviously, you need to have as much information as possible to make decisions. But every once in a while, you need a little bit of pixie dust, a little bit of magic, and often that comes in the form of a 5th, 6th, or 7th rounder hitting on some level. And obviously, it is far too early. The kid just signed his contract, has not played a professional game yet.
Right.
But if you're going to be one of the elite franchises in the NHL eventually, this is going to happen to you once or twice, right? How often do we talk about Henrik Zetterberg being a 1700th round draft pick?
Oh, there's the list could go on and on. Henrik Zetterberg's one. Zetterberg's just one case. Jamie Benn's an example. Andre Palat's an example. And they're all. And think about it. It's been a little bit since Zetterberg was playing, obviously, so it's a little bit more of a pass gamble. But Jamie Benn made a Cup final recently.
Yep.
Andre Palat made 1 Stanley Cups recently.
Sure did.
Like, you got to find these guys too. Absolutely, 1,000%. I totally hear you there.
Yep. And again, way, way, way too early to say this is that kid. We've hyped up every prospect that's ever come through the Flyer system on this show. I understand who we are. I know.
Well, I think that's slowly but surely being shed too, because
sure. Well, and the other thing is, as you're going through a rebuild, as you're tearing it down, you need to find something to root for. You need to find something to keep you sane, somebody to kind of latch on to, and hey, that's my guy. I'm gonna be a fan of Alexis Gendron through the rebuild.
Well, and that's why right now more than that, it's just you need to be a fan of the potential of anybody.
Sure.
Let's this way. You want to have enough team, you want to have 2 full rosters full practically of, hey, you know what? I'm watching guys on the Phantoms. I'm watching guys in juniors. I'm watching guys on the U.S. national team or in the college ranks. There's guys in, let's put this way. Everybody's going to be paying attention to the KHL now, aren't they?
Yep.
You know what I mean? You got guys over there. You want to have 40 players that you're sitting here saying it's worth seeing what happens if somebody emerges among the 4. You want to find and this is how small the success rate really is. You want to find 5 to 10 of those guys currently that can move the needle and get you excited.
Sure.
And I know that's only 25%, but that's at maximum. But that's really what you want. You want to be because out of the 25%, if you can hit really well on 2 or 3.
You feel good about it.
Well, then it transforms your roster. That's how you build cornerstones of your roster, and then everything else fills in. It doesn't have to be elite status. You just need 2 or 3 of those elite guys, or better if you can. I mean, look, that's certainly the hope in the KHL, is it not? Again, I know we're kind of going back to that, but listen, Matvei Michkov is like we said, that's your big swing, and that's the guy who carries that level of weight of how much he can shift a franchise. If you can tag along a bunch of other people with him that are just in the very good to great tier, you hope that, see, that's the other part of it. You hope that those guys by themselves are good to very great and can find a spot, and then he comes in and turns them into very good to great because of the fact that you go, he's that much better than everybody anyway. That's what makes him great. Is the other part of it is that you get the guy who elevates everybody.
Yeah, and honestly, just going on Michkov here, it does put you in a bit of an unusual position. So when the Pittsburgh Penguins drafted Mario Lemieux, they were still garbage for several years. Mm-hmm. When they drafted Sidney Crosby, they were garbage for several years.
Not as long, but yes.
When the Oilers drafted McDavid, they were garbage for a couple of years. The Flyers, however, are in a different position. Because what's the difference between all those guys and Matvei Michkov?
The main difference is all three were able to play effective immediately.
Correct. And now, instead, you don't have your superstar, your generational guy, whatever he ends up being, whatever Matvei Michkov turns into. You don't have him on the roster right now. You know he's coming. Mm-hmm. So if you can set yourself up, kind of like we talked about these 1 and 2 year contracts, you're moving pieces on a chessboard, you're getting yourself arranged, you can get yourself in a position where if you can maximize the production you get out of Matvei Michkov's 3-year ELC, where he's making less than $1 million on your salary cap, $3 or $4 million with bonuses, but whatever.
Yeah, I hear you.
You can put yourself in a really, 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 really good position.
Now imagine something else with that. Okay, now imagine because there was a couple
again.
Well, no, well.
You spike the draft again? Like, you're going to be bad for the next 2 years. Like, you could get a top 3 pick in both years, frankly.
Let's not even jump to this year and the possibilities that exist, because there's already, I mean, if you're going to the top 3 already, then there's already names that are popping out on that list.
Yep.
But we're not even going to get into that. No,
I'm already looking at Michael Misa in 25.
Can we stick with Macklin Celebrini and Cole Iserman first?
Okay.
For this year, and then we'll talk later.
I think Michael Meese is a 25.
But either way, no, what I was going to get at was I was taking it the other direction, which is because there were a couple comments that came out today, actually, from Cutter Gauthier about why he didn't go to development camp, and he said he had played a lot and things like that. And the intention, by the way, is still he's going to play his sophomore season at Boston College and then intends to sign at the end of the year. And which, by the way, he hopes is after the Flyers season is over, because his intention is Boston College is going to be in the Frozen Four, which is not far-fetched by any stretch, because if you look at their roster coming in, it's going to be a really fun team.
Have you ever watched a single minute of college hockey? They're going to be there.
Well, yeah, but they've had a couple, like BC had a couple lean years in the last while, and it was like big on this freshman class that's coming in, which again we've already talked about to no end with. I mean, it's everybody, isn't it? It's like half of the first round is going to be playing there between Will Smith and Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault, and it's like, geez, that and Gautier's coming back, like after we've already talked about the way he played at World Championships, not World Juniors, World Championships. And so he still intends to sign, but it's going to be after this year, whatever. So now take that timeline. So you're burning potentially, you could be burning the first full year of Michkov without burning burning the first full year of Mishkov's waiting period, without burning the first year of Gauthier, which means there's a possibility that exists that the first year of Mishkov's entry-level deal will be the last of Gauthier's, and you're paying them both under $1 million.
Yeah.
3 years from now, under $2 million, less than $2 million for two players that are probably in your top 6.
All those 1 and 2 year contracts we talked about earlier, that wasn't an accident.
No, it wasn't. It's setting you. Yes,
because Danny Briere and Danny Briere is going to have 24 more months to evaluate who is going to be on his team when it's time to be good. And by the way, if you're not there, you won't be there.
Well, and by the way, look, stick to the anticipation that it's 3 years. right? But what if it's not?
It's not. There's no
And
shot.
and that's all I'm saying. What if it's not?
I know.
And if it's not, and you're really lumping him together with Gauthier for more than 1 year of
If
ELC
you can get
time,
2 years out of that, oof.
But then you're also sitting here in the same period going, it's all evaluation, and it's all going to change possibly rapidly at that given moment.
Absolutely.
What I can't wait to see when it comes to Mishkov in that sense is I just want to see what kind of numbers he has at the KHL level. Like once he starts playing there for like, not that he didn't already, but like playing there for real, and playing, knowing that now, like, it's not your draft year. It's not one of these things. Like, you now know what your future kind of holds. You're playing you're playing this contract.
You're showing up to the NHL in a couple of years. You better get ready, bud.
But I think there's also like the excitement level that he brings for the franchise. I hope that sticks in his mind, and I think it does too. And like I don't think he was, I don't think it was unknown to him throughout the course of the weekend that like, hey, by the way, everybody's really excited that you're a Flyer.
Absolutely.
Like I don't think it was. So in that sense, I hope that some of that sticks with him. That you're thinking about the possibility like of being the best player, and that's a Russian mindset anyway. This work hard, this work ethic of going to, it's get up and work hard every day and things like this is what we, like think about what we used to say about Ivan Provorov, how he never missed a game because that's not the way they do things. You know what I mean? Like it's just not the way they think. Like Ovechkin's like that too. Ovechkin doesn't really take time off, does he?
He's a monster. No.
Because that's the way that that's the mindset. So hopefully that carries over as well. Speaking of all of that, I do have one more piece for the odds and ends because this is another thing came out kind of today. Because we haven't really talked much about this because it's really a lot of unknowns and things like that. But this really kind of actually at least gives it an easier way to resolve the situation, so to speak. Like there's going to be a resolution. It's going to be one way or the other, and that's where things sit at the moment. We're waiting for this. Ivan Fedotov, because there's been a lot of talk about whether or not he's going to be able to play at the NHL level. That, and it was mentioned before that, when they were making qualifying offers to all of the RFAs, or most of them, I should say, because they did not qualify a few, they told his contract, which basically meant rolling it over for another year. He didn't get to play out the year that he had signed for. So now they're trying to carry it over for the 23-24 season.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Sounds like that's on the table. And you start hearing things about he's going to be free from the military service. He put in his year. Now that was over, he should be able to go wherever he wants to. And then here comes a contract in Russia again, and he's signing it. And this is and Moscow's telling you
there's debate because there's an NHL contract and there's a KHL contract.
And Moscow's telling you that's not the case. Nope, it's our contract was everything. We've done everything by the book. We went through all the right processes, all that type of stuff. And the Flyers are going to stand by, and the NHL are going to stand by. He's got a valid contract in the NHL right now.
Yep. Right. And for people that don't know, the NHL and the KHL have an agreement of understanding where basically they recognize. Right. An agreement of understanding where if a team has a player signed to a contract in one league, that the other league won't try to force contractual obligations to get that player while they're still under contract in the other league.
Correct. And the interesting part of this is ironically another Flyers goaltender is going through it's a similar situation, but done in the way where you know that the leagues have communication by this.
Right.
Because Alexei Kolosov, who's the Belarusian goalie who does play in the KHL, is on loan. He signed his entry-level deal. He's got an NHL contract, and they loaned him back for the first year. They loaned him back to the KHL.
And that happens all the time. That is not unusual.
Correct. And that's where he's going to play. And he shows up. He's at camp. In the KHL, it's a done deal. He's playing there. And presumably, when the loan is up after this season, he will come back. And he will play. He'll be at that point. He's at development camps. He's part of probably part of the Phantoms. You start the normal trajectory of AHL to NHL,
being an NHL player, right?
North American development. Let's call it.
Well, right, that's fair. Yeah.
So the question with Fedotov is, where is he playing? Because we don't really have an answer for this. The good news out of this is, and Darren Dreger tweeted this stuff out just a little while ago, like earlier on Sunday evening, and said that basically, so the NHL and the Flyers submitted that Fedotov's contract should be told based on missing last season due to military service in Russia. It is now in the hands of the IIHF, who will consider the submission and then basically be able to make a ruling on who has the player for the upcoming season. There was a statement that was issued by Fedotov's representation that said that they had spoken with him today on this matter, and his position is he'll abide by the ruling. So
sure,
whatever contract is valid and binding, he's going to honor, and he just wants to resume playing as soon as possible. Now the question with this is a big question, because if it's ruled in favor of the KHL contract, there is no question here. He just goes and plays for the KHL, and that's the end of that. If the Flyers contract is valid,
we find out if Russia is going to cooperate or not.
No, it's not that. It's not that at all. It's actually here's the catch. Where is he playing then? Because technically, the Flyers could say, "Okay, we're moving your contract. You're not moving it, but you're going to start with the Phantoms." The guy hasn't played really professional hockey in a year,
right?
And he's coming from years of playing in Russia. We know all about this when it comes to international hockey, right? Rink dimensions are different. When you're a goalie,
that matters.
That changes things. Yep. It's one thing to sit there and say, "Hey, the ice surface is smaller," when you're a forward, and it's okay. That just means, let's just say if the ice surface is smaller and you're able to skate fast and you were fast in the KHL, you're going to be faster in the NHL because it's a lot less distance to cover. Well, but when you're a goalie, you're trying to play different angles.
Right.
It's challenging.
And every foreign goalie that's ever come into the NHL has dealt with that. So obviously it's not something that the kid can't handle, but throwing him into the deep end with a little bit of a geopolitical situation playing out behind him, it's a stressful process, and we'll see how he kind of transitions with that.
The other part of it also is that, and imagine if you don't know, there's so much to resolve even with it, because what if I'm thinking about it from Major League Baseball standpoint, where when you draft somebody in the Rule 5 draft, you either have to keep the guy on your roster for the year or you send him back to the team that he was supposed to play
that you
for.
Drafted him from.
So I almost think about it like that, where it's if he's not a Flyer,
do you just loan him back to the KHL?
It's not do you just loan him? It's do you have to if you want to honor the contract?
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it's pointless to sit there and say, well, the way you're going to honor the contract is to loan him back to somewhere else. That's not even It's not the same thing as an entry level anymore. Kind of it is, but it's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it was designed that way, but it really isn't. Especially at his age, he's 26, going on 27. It's not the same thing.
Turns out Russia just likes making things complicated.
But the thing for this is what I'm getting at. If he has to play at the NHL level, if that's the way that he honors the contract, what do you do when you've also got currently Carter Hart, Cal Peterson, Sam Harrison, and Felix Sandstrom? Somebody's got to go.
Yep. Probably two.
Well,
probably not. But
no. One of the easy things to do is Cal Peterson probably makes his way to the minors, and maybe Sam Harrison does too, for that matter. To be honest, because
probably
Harrison can then get number 1 minutes in the minors and until you need him or whatever the story may be. And again,
Cal Peterson's going to play the whole lot of the second half of a whole lot of AHL back-to-backs.
Again, it's odds and ends time, right?
Yep.
Maybe throw in the fact that we also don't have any more knowledge on Carter Hart, Hockey Canada, all that stuff right now. So that's still just up in the air at the moment. Yeah. That's the stuff, kind of in a way, that's what doesn't, that's what still leaves questions for your offseason. I mean, we're sitting here, we spent all that time on Morgan Frost and all this anticipation of just get the contract done because everything else is done. It's it's not really done, you've got other questions that, and look, that's not what's important in those situations, obviously.
Right. Of course.
But they do exist. It's not like the only question left in your offseason is, hey, I wonder what contract Morgan Frost is going to get. No, you've got a goaltender who's in Russia who doesn't know what team he's playing for because the IHF has to make a decision. And you've got a complete, forget hockey-wide, nationwide international scandal that you have to get a resolution to that everybody is waiting on.
When we talk about Danny Briere being done, I think we're talking about he's done with the things he can control, right? Hockey Canada comes out, and that could dramatically change your franchise because you have to terminate the contract of a goalie. But until you know that, you don't know that.
Well, exactly. And here's the thing: if you don't know it, like we don't know it,
we don't know it.
Well, then is Danny Briere's mind like, first of all, half the league doesn't want to trade for anybody from that whole thing anyway until they know. And then if you're Danny Briere, you're sitting there going, maybe he fits the timeline still in his mind.
Sure,
so
he's 24.
Right. So you're sitting here going, maybe I just want him to be my goaltender. Like that's, look, obviously you'll take the steps if he's not going to be your goaltender because of something else, but maybe there's no story beyond that. Like it's either you're part of this thing and your contract's getting terminated or you're not.
Yeah, so much rides on that. Yeah, so much rides on that it just...
And I only bring it up because of the fact that there was rumblings that it was possibly as early as this past weekend that something could come out. It's going to have to be soon because, look, you already waited until, like, let's get through all the other festivities.
You got to get
this to do anything with this.
You got to get this out before teams start showing up to camp. You have to.
Well, it's already overdue to begin with, but...
I know. But.
It's beside, so that's a beside the point kind of thing. Like, honestly, there is no time that is too soon at this point. It just do it and do right by the whole situation, not from a hockey perspective. Rip the Band-Aid off and just get everything out there so that there's some form of justice. Like that's what it's really all about.
Justice, like closure, answers. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But that's all I'm saying. Like you've got two situations right now that are very different, honestly.
Oh yeah.
And to be honest, like it's not even worth talking in hypotheticals with it because there's elements of both where you sit there and you say the hypotheticals from a hockey standpoint don't matter.
Yep. No, absolutely not.
We said that about Fedotov last year. Like when he's being detained. And you're trying to figure out where he even is in the world. It's like, do you care about whether or not he's playing hockey, or do you care that he lives?
That he literally survives because he's being sent.
Right. They're showing you stuff where his medical condition isn't even good. Like, it stops being a hockey story at that point. It's a human story, and the same is true for the other side of this, where it's a human story. It's not a hockey story. It's a human story, and justice needs to be served to the right people once the time comes. But until the time comes, it remains a very gigantic human story.
It's a big fat stain on the league that they just can't do anything about until we get this news. But all right,
on to some other stuff, right?
I was going to say, speaking of some news from around the league, we do have some happier stories here. Let's start from the back end of this list and work our way to the front because I think that makes the most sense here. So
I think because the last one's going to take us the most time to talk about because we could probably go on about him for a while.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start with Sebastian Aho. Mm-hmm. And Sebastian Aho has inked his extension with the Carolina Hurricanes. Mm-hmm. It is an 8-year extension at 9.5?
I thought it was maybe 9.75.
Okay. I'm sorry. But either way, Sebastian Aho, the Carolina Hurricanes have signed probably their second or third best forward, depending on how you rate Andrei Svechnikov. He might be their best, frankly. One of their best forwards to a long-term deal at a number that is probably about right value now, and is probably going to look spectacular as the cap continues to rise. It's a really nice piece of business out of Don Waddell. It's a really nice piece of business out of Sebastian Aho. Kevin, you got to see Sebastian Aho for 8 more years. 9 more because he signed a year early.
Yeah, that's right.
We're going to be seeing a whole lot of Sebastian Aho over the next decade. What do you got for me?
That it's a no-brainer for Carolina to do this because this is your best player, and when you've got a player like this, you absolutely go ahead and do this. Yep. I mean, to be honest, it's remarkable enough that it's not that huge of a raise when you consider it. I mean, he's already making the cap hit he's making for next year is 8.46. It's not that big of a raise when you think about it. I mean, you're only going from that to 9.75 over the bulk years where the cap is supposed to go up. So it
has potential to be an incredible value.
Certainly does. And like that, this is one of those things where you go, the no movement clause throughout makes tons of sense. Like this is your cornerstone.
Yeah, this is the Flyers. This is the Flyers signing Claude Giroux to an 8-year contract in 2013. Like this is just you're locking up one of the cornerstones of your franchise for most of the next decade.
Yeah,
it's easy math.
What's more interesting about the deal to me than the actual aspect of it for Carolina and Aho making money that he he deserves easily.
Absolutely,
probably he's that
more.
level of he's that level. Well, definitely more by the time the cap goes up. If you're talking
percentages. And this screams, by the way, took a discount to help the team win.
Yeah, it probably does. Absolutely.
This is I'm going to be a leader and take less so that everyone else has to take less.
The bigger story to me out of this is what it represents for next year's free agent class, because it might have been even within a day or two of I was kind of just browsing around online, like whatever hockey. There wasn't much
cruising the threads like the kids do.
Not necessarily that. I mean, I think it actually came across. It was an ESPN.com story that was kind of highlighting what the 2024 draft class could look like.
Yeah,
and Aho was one
free agent class.
A free agent class. Yeah, sorry. No. Yeah, we've been heavy on draft talk over there.
Yeah.
Free agency class, and Aho was one of the key players on the list, obviously, because that's a it's a superstar, all-star player who's going to potentially be available, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, maybe within a day or two, the contract was signed, the extension was signed. So it's like, I'm obviously not shocking that Carolina sees it. It's just that to me was taking somebody that is going to be a part of that team for years to come. Somebody who's going to be a fixture of that team for as long as he can, and because of it, like that's what's going to start, or maybe it's not what's going to, but it should be anyway. Like you see these teams who do latch on to those players who, we can try to get excited about what the potential of a free agent class is going to look like, but there's a lot of guys around the league
that are just going to resign,
who ultimately do this because it's not even just because they just end up re-signing. Like they don't re-sign for no reason. They usually end up re-signing if they're either going to be able to get the money from that team in terms of like, yes, there is a sizable pay increase that is able to come from that team, number one. And number two is usually when that team, like Carolina has been, has Sebastian Aho over the early years of playing, but like not by much. Like when he got hit when he had that offer sheet matched.
Yep.
And that's what really kind of set the bar in motion for what level player he was, because somebody went there with the offer sheet.
You know what? I will mention that it is interesting now to see him sign a long-term deal after that whole offer sheet situation, because there could be some bad blood in the front office, and it's nice to see that there's not.
Yeah, there doesn't seem like it. No, so. Yeah. But that's like it is really interesting that he goes from it was entry-level deal to matched offer sheet to big time
long-term extension. Yep.
And like he's an interesting player too, because it doesn't like there's an element of it where it doesn't feel like he's been in the league for this long. You know what I mean?
He's been around though.
Like you're talking about a guy whose entry-level deal started in 16-17.
Yep.
Like it doesn't feel like that, but
we're creeping up on 7 or 8 years of Sebastian Aho.
Yeah, I mean, he's been he's an impressive player, and now we just wait and see what that does for anybody else. I don't know that it's going to do anything else for any of those other big free agents that are going to be available next year, but you never know. I mean, this is kind of the time. Like once we get into the late July, early August period, like now that you're done, you start to you actually almost can crunch the numbers again and now go, okay, what's it going to look like next year? Because you're trying to do extensions, not the other way around. You know what I mean? Like,
yep. And one of the guys who will be available next year, unless he chooses to extend, is going to be Vladimir Tarasenko. He signed a 1-year deal to go to the Ottawa Senators. He's going to make $5 million. I imagine he's going to play on power play 1 with Claude Giroux and Brady Tkachuk, and that'll be fun. Maybe not even Claude Giroux at this point, honestly.
Yeah, who knows?
Depending on what roster shows up and how they look. But regardless, I think Giroux and Tarasenko sounds like a spectacular duo if you can get them on the ice at the same time.
Sure.
Holy.
It's really impressive that in the wake of the DeBrincat trade and the way that finished up, that they essentially replaced him with Vladimir Tarasenko.
Yep.
It's very impressive.
Absolutely.
And to be honest with you,
Pierre Dorian's done a great job with that.
Well, and to be honest with you, I was starting to prepare for this week's show. I was starting to make preparations thinking we were going to come in and when we got to the league-wide stuff, be talking about the fact that guys like Tarasenko had not signed yet. and it's the end of July, and it's like, this is pretty massive here. And it was he signed, and he signed 3 days ago,
Yep.
So it is what it is, like it is what it is for taking, like for the time frame that it takes, but it doesn't make a difference. You still get a player who, we know what he delivers, right? Like we know what kind of player he is.
And to some extent, it feels a little bit like Taylor Hall signing a 1-year prove-it deal in Buffalo. That being said, I do think that this Ottawa team is going to be much better than that Buffalo team was. I do think Tarasenko is going to be a little bit more impactful in terms of the standings and potential playoff races than Taylor Hall was.
Sure.
But either way, it'll be interesting to see. It's another guy who is waiting for the cap to go up. And we saw a lot of 1-year deals signed this offseason, and this is just kind of another version of that.
Well, and let's not, one of the other pieces that was not really being overlooked here, and again, it's a guy who's on the last year of his contract, so it kind of can go either way here. But when they traded DeBrincat, they got Dominic Kubalik back in the deal too.
Yeah.
So, you're substituting DeBrincat for Kubalik and Tarasenko. Not bad.
No, and when you're a team that's trying to fill out your depth like the Ottawa Senators are, you don't necessarily mind, breaking one Alex DeBrincat down into 2 roster players.
And just imagine what happens when they get everybody else kind of going. Like Josh Norris couldn't play last year for a big chunk of it, and
they
another
could be a
year
really
old,
solid team.
and another year older of all these other younger guys that you're trying to see. Even a guy like I know we've talked because we can talk about the top of that group for days, right? Like the Stutzlas and that type of stuff, and Shabbat on the back end. But when Jake Sanderson gets another year older and gets a little bit closer to being what he could be, and even a Ridley Gregg is another one of those guys who's going to be the time helps getting closer in that regard. And oh, by the way, they get a full year of Jacob Chikrin too, by the way.
Yeah, no, don't sleep on Ottawa. And that actually leads me really nicely. Is there might be a playoff spot available.
Well,
in that
and
division.
You know what? It's funny too, because that's why when we were talking about free agency moves in the last show, it's why I loved the Korpisalo signing for them so much too, because now it feels like they got a goalie to go with it.
Absolutely.
They kind of were getting pieces at every other position, and they just keep doing it. Korpisalo now gets joined by Tarasenko and Kubalik, and you're just
Ottawa might just mess around and make the playoffs this year. They really might.
They really might.
It's looking like they got a shot at that.
I liked them last year, and I know it was kind of not that kind of year for them. I think that they actually it's funny when they were trading DeBrincat, I wasn't convinced anymore. I was like, something doesn't feel right.
Something's derailing here.
Or at least it's not the way that you want to see it be. He's basically demanding the trade, right?
Right.
So because of it, you're sitting here going, okay, That takes away from what they had, because DeBrincat was a big reason of why I thought they had a shot at the playoffs last year.
Absolutely.
And then you fill it back in with that, and I think your goaltending's better, and you're getting you get a full year of Jacob Chikrin this time, and you have 2 guys who are really young, who I think can continue to grow into the role. I think it's only going to continue to get better.
Absolutely. And what I was alluding to a second ago, there may be some vulnerability in that division. They may have a chance to climb up that division because the top of the Atlantic Division took a major blow this week. Patrice Bergeron made it clear that he would be retiring, that he would not be returning for his 750th season.
Not quite, but yeah, I get you.
Certainly feels that way. This is a guy who's represented Canada at the Olympics. He has won the Stanley Cup. He has been around for ever and ever. He has won 1,000 Selkies. Should have won every Lady Bing. Ask anybody in the sport and they'll tell you that Patrice Bergeron is one of the best human beings to ever lace up a pair of hockey skates. And obviously, we have nothing but respect here for him at the show, and we wish him the best of luck in his retirement. I'm sure he doesn't need it because he is going to be just fine.
Yeah, he will.
He'll be a French language announcer for whatever team he wants immediately.
Nope, I don't buy that for a second.
No?
No.
Do you think he's going coaching?
No, I think he's going to be an exec. I think he's going to I think he's going to start at scouting, and he's going to work his way up and be
I could see him doing some media. Not a ton.
It's
not forever.
It's possible.
But I could see him going to Keith Jones' route.
Well,
maybe going media directly into the front office.
For starters, because I did listen to a little bit of his press conference, obviously. For starters, it sounds like he's doing nothing for the beginning, which is
good
a great
for him.
decision. Good for him.
Good for you, Patrice.
Go spend time with the family and leave it at that for a little while.
Go spend time dressed in friggin' Elmo costumes. You saw that one, right?
Oh, yes, of course I did.
Some iconic Patrice Bergeron clips have
emerged
resurfaced over the last week or so, and it's been a fun time because, like I said, the dude is just such a good guy. He's about as wholesome as it gets.
Well, we'll hear from him again relatively soon when as soon as he's eligible for the Hockey Hall of Fame because he's going in first effective ballot. Immediately. As far as I'm concerned, I'm surprised that unless I missed something, I'm surprised they haven't announced the jersey retirement already.
So that's what I was going to ask. So the Boston,
you'll get it.
The Boston Bruins are one of those organizations. They're the original six. They have to be really stingy with their number retirements.
Sure.
I assume he's getting it. Don't get me wrong. I also assume that Chara is getting it at some point. They're probably going up together.
I don't know. Because Chara's been...
They overlap so much.
They do. Chara's been out long enough, I think, is where I'm going.
But why isn't it up, though?
Yeah, I know.
That's what I'm saying. So...
Maybe what I'm thinking of is that it's not that he's out of the league long enough. He's been off of the Bruins for longer than it feels like, kind of. You know what I mean?
My question to you, do any other players from that Bruins team of the last 15 years or so, do any other players earn that distinction? So
of getting their number retired?
Yes, because here's how I look at it.
Okay.
It's a little too early to tell on Pastrnak, obviously, because quite frankly, I expect him to go somewhere else at some point. I don't expect him to be a lifelong Bruin.
Well, he just signed, though. He signed a big deal, so he's got a big ticket.
Yeah, but we'll see.
All right.
You also have to win there to be in consideration, and he hasn't won there yet.
True.
I think your big names coming out of that team, like we're talking Krejci, Lucic, I don't think any of those guys kind of raised to that level. I think the only guy who's got a chance, and it's because he's still active, is Marchand.
That's fair. I mean, I'm trying to kind of because what I'm trying to figure out is I don't think they do it. Yeah, I think what they do is it's just the Bruins don't have a Hall of Fame. They just have its affiliation with the Hall of Fame. So yes, there's a bunch of players that you could be mentioning that could. I'm not saying Lucic is a Hall of Famer. It's not the point. It's if somebody's associated with it's not like they have a Bruins Hall of Fame where they start to pick off guys.
No, because all those guys would be in there for sure.
Sure, it would feel like that.
But number retirement, especially for an original six franchise, is sacred ground.
Yeah, sure. I don't think there's any question that 33 and 37 are in the next wave. I got to imagine Marchand 63 will probably make it.
I agree.
He's got the longevity and he did win, and
a lot of their other guys are still too young, right? It's still too early to tell on McAvoy. It's too early to tell on Pastrnak for sure. I think Tuukka Rask would have had a chance if he didn't have to fight with Tim Thomas every other year for the first half of the decade.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean,
because Tim Thomas won.
Yeah, I hear you. And then
Tuukka Rask blew it in 2015.
Yeah, and Tim Thomas has been retired for plenty long enough that you can make decisions on that too. So
he's not going up. I don't think.
No, I don't think it's because I don't think it lasted long enough.
Right, I was going to say it takes,
yes, those years were great. Don't get me wrong, but it's got to last.
Sustained excellence, especially in those original six franchises. If Tim Thomas was a member of the Columbus Blue Jackets, he'd get his number retired.
Well, all right. Here's something for you to consider. Also, just to consider, okay? Because Krejci's an interesting one for this.
Yep.
Because Krejci's right in the running, he's in the points total running. He's past, he's ahead of guys who do have their number retired. You know what I mean? I think he is.
I think Krejci's a Hall of Famer. I don't think he's jersey retirement.
If Krejci's going into the Hockey Hall of Fame, then he probably deserves to get his jersey retired because that's the only team he ever played for, basically.
Yeah, but I hold jersey retirement to a higher threshold.
I know you do. I get it.
Especially with the original six franchises.
Yeah, I know, but Like, okay, and here's where I was trying this, because this is where I was going to try to go with Pastrnak for a second. And I guess it's too early to tell in the immediate because I'm not seeing. I mean, I guess I can look up what his points are and try to deduct from there because I'm not looking at just the Bruins list. Like, it cuts off at a certain point is what I mean.
Right.
The one I'm looking at. But Pasternak's got 301 goals, regular season, by the way, obviously, but 301 goals. If he, as a Bruin, strictly as a Bruin, gets into Esposito and Busick territory,
you got to put
pushes
him there.
500, you got to put him up.
No, I agree. Absolutely.
Like, if he's challenging for records, like Bergeron's the third highest point scorer in franchise history behind Bourque and Busick.
He's going up.
Like, you think his number's going to, and he's got more points than Esposito. Like,
and he faithfully wore the A for a decade. Like, come on, he's going in. He's
right,
going up.
That's another really good point is the games played totals, because if you're that player from a games played standpoint, then absolutely. Okay, Tuukka Rask. This is an interesting case with Tuukka Rask. Like, and this is like, look, Tim Thomas played nearly 400 games with this team.
Yeah,
it's a lot. Tuukka Rask, though, played over 500. He's got the most games played of any goalie in franchise history, and is the leading win. Has the most wins.
Right.
Kind of hard to leave him off of a list of, like, we're going to retire. Then no other goalie is deserving ever of having their number retired.
I think the thing with Tuukka, and I would put him in first of all, I'd put him up.
Sure,
but I don't know if it has softened since he retired. I assume it kind of has. Boston had a really hard time getting over 2015. Him letting up 2 goals in the final 30 seconds of a Stanley
you mean
Cup
13
game.
then? Yeah,
2013. I'm sorry. Boston had a really hard time getting over that.
Yeah.
Like to the end, to the point where we're booing him in the bubble because he left to go be with his daughter. Like, bad stuff. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. Mm-hmm. But the fact that Tim Thomas was your goalie for the 2011 Cup, and Tuukka Rask was 0-2 in Stanley Cup Finals for the Boston Bruins, with my elevated standard of what it takes to get your number retired,
right?
I think if they do it, I won't be upset, but I think he falls just shy.
The thing that's interesting to me is they don't have a goalie whose number's retired at all.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering. Guy? Well, he's got over 300 career wins. That to me is making me think it's a strong possibility.
That's fair.
That's the only reason. I think the numbers back it up. I like. There's plenty of goalies who, by the way, forget just losing a couple Stanley Cup Finals. There's goalies who don't even get there.
Well, of course.
You know what I mean? Like, Roberto Luongo didn't win anything in Florida, and yet they put his number up there anyway.
That's true.
You know what I mean? Like,
they put him up in Florida for his Twitter account. Let's be honest.
Maybe, I don't know. but anyway, let's get off of Tuukka Rask and back to Bergeron for a second.
Back on Bergeron.
Because it was a little. There's an element of it that was a little surprising. I'm not going to lie. Like,
it seemed like they were tuning up to get the band back together one more time after the first round exit.
Because it makes me think about what we talked about when that series ended, which was that
it can't end like this.
It can't end like this. But there's also an element of it that makes a ton of sense, because there's a reason why the emotion was as heavy as it was after that game.
We all kind of thought that might have been the case, right?
Right. Well, that's
we were all at least suspicious of it.
But I do respect the reason for his decision, because I think he tried to gear up to come back.
I agree.
And then sat there and looked the way off-season workouts are going and sits there and goes, listen,
I'm too old for this.
Right. Like, I just don't, the body's telling me don't do it.
Danny Glover, Lethal Weapon. I'm too old for this. Yeah, I know, right?
Stuff. And I respect that he's going to sit there and say, like, the only thing, like, and you know what? It was constantly speculated for years and years and years. Like, every time they would be out for a season, it was, is he going to come back? What are we doing? Getting the band back together? What's the deal?
Yeah.
They attempted, and if he's being told, if his body's telling him and in his heart he feels like this is it, then good for you for going out on your terms and not letting something else get in the way of that.
Absolutely. It is.
And that's what's most respectful about it, is like, he just, like, he's done everything else he can possibly accomplish. I know we've talked about that, but it's like, and then like as an incredibly classy player already, he goes out in the classiest fashion also because it's just Patrice Bergeron for you. Like
he is an absolute legend of the sport, and quite frankly, just because of how the media works in Quebec. If he goes into Quebec media, I don't expect to hear from him for about 10 years, just because that's how that works. But I could also see him emerging in 10 years and taking a job in a front office and just doing the Keith Jones thing.
Potentially, I wouldn't be shocked. And speaking of honors, by the way, because we know he's going to go into the Hall of Fame. We know he's going to get his number retired in Boston. We know all of these things are going to happen.
Yeah.
Does the league do something that they never do and change the name of a trophy for him? I think they probably should.
I think they probably should. I don't know if they will. And if they do, it won't be for a couple of years. They'll do it when they put him in the Hall of Fame if they're going to do it.
That wouldn't be the worst way to approach it. That wouldn't be the worst way to approach it, though. You know, because then you have him there. The trophy's there for the rest of the year.
Exactly.
It's a good. That's not a bad idea. But that's the other big discussion piece, because we know all the individual accolades are going to come, but when they put your name on a trophy, like.
Yep.
And it's even more, like, as far as I'm concerned, that might be even more immortal than
absolutely
than the plaque on the wall. Like,
when's the last time anybody thought about Frank J. Selke as a hockey player?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay then.
And
like the only like we talk about Art Ross and Maurice Richard a little bit.
Yeah.
But okay, so I think
Richard's a recognizable enough
player
that we can still go there. I mean,
all right. That's going to do it for us today. We kind of ran out of stuff to talk about here. We don't have any more Flyers gear. We're in the middle of a summer show. So we'll be back in 2 weeks. In the meantime, follow us on social media. We're at YWT everywhere. Kevin's at Kevin_Durso everywhere. Find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including sportstalkphilly.com. Check us out over there as well. Hit the buttons, the likes, the subscribes, the whatever it is.
Whatever you got to push to get everything.
Algorithm, etc.
Yeah.
All right. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. Kevin, anything else you got?
Nope.
Okay. See ya.